basketball hero around here is treated like a god. I mean, how can you ever find out what he could really do? I don't want this to be the high point of his life. I've seen them, the real sad ones. They sit around the rest of their lives talking about the glory days when they were 17 years old.
You know, most people would kill to be treated like a god just for a few moments.
Welcome to the Keeping the Nostalgia live show. I am your host, Billy Powell. You are either watching this on our YouTube channel, the Keeping the Nostalgia live show, or you're listening on Keeping the Nostalgia Live. That's all one word, keepingthenostalgialive.podbean.com. As you can tell, my guest today, I think this is my fourth Major League Baseball interview, and they keep getting better. As you can see with us is a 13-year Major League Baseball veteran, batted over 300 for his career, has a 1990 Cincinnati Reds World Series championship ring. They went wire to wire that year. What a great season that was. Is Hal Morris. Hal Morris, thank you so much for spending some time with us to help keep the nostalgia alive and talk about baseball, basketball, and maybe we'll toss a little tennis in there.
Well, thank you for inviting me to chat, Bill. I appreciate it.
So you're originally from Alabama. How did you make it to Indiana?
Well, my dad was in the service, and he was stationed at Fort Rucker, which is right outside of Mobile, Alabama. And when he left Fort Rucker, this was when I was a year old. My sister was 2 years old. He relocated. He and my mom, they moved to Munster. My mom still. My dad passed away a few years ago. My mom is still there, so she's been in Munster for 54 years now.
You know, as soon as you said Munster, everybody started humming the theme song.
Well, it's funny, when I tell people I'm from Munster that are outside of Indiana, they think Muncie. Munster, definitely. I get a lot of thoughts about Herman Munster and that show.
Do you still have any kind of, do you enjoy Alabama football, or just because you were born there, do you get to claim that, or it's
I claimed it for a long time. And it's funny because I went to Michigan, and I really did not like Michigan when I was growing up, and I was a huge Alabama fan. This is back when Bear Bryant was the coach. But once I went to school in Ann Arbor, my allegiances had to shift. So I am a true blue Big Ten fan. So I root for any Big Ten team, but hopefully Michigan.
Awesome. What sport did you really first start really getting heavily involved in? Was it in any of the ones that you were really successful in, baseball, basketball, or tennis, or did you enjoy football? What did you kind of tinker with before getting good at any particular one?
Well, I think baseball. I picked up a bat when I was 2 years old and started swinging a bat, and my dad started to pitch me when I was 3, I believe. And I always enjoyed playing baseball more than anything else. But back in the late 60s and 70s, we would come home from school and we would play whatever we could based upon the weather. So we would play football and basketball in the fall, a little tennis. Then once it got too cold, we'd play basketball. If we could find a court inside, but then we'd play hockey if we could freeze our backyards. And then we got around to the spring, we started playing baseball. So a lot of it was seasonally dependent, but we played anything and everything.
What baseball team did you first fall in love with?
Well, growing up there in Munster, I was probably probably less than 25 miles away from Comiskey Park. So I watched the White Sox whenever I could, but I also watched the Cubs too. This is pre-cable, so the Cubs were on WGN and the White Sox were on Channel 44, which was a UHF station, I think. But anyway, whatever game was on, I would watch. And at that time, Harry Carey was announcing for the White Sox. He and Jimmy Pearsall, and that was always interesting. So my dad and I used to get a big bang on to listen to those two.
It's Chicago sports is interesting. Were you a Bears fan also?
For sure. I remember Gale Sayers vividly from my youth. I can remember Dick Butkus. Mike Buffone was a great linebacker. But I remember all those guys. And I also I could tell you, discussed the Bulls back at that time and also the Blackhawks. So being there from the Calumet region, you tend to root for the Chicago teams.
It's interesting how time goes by because, Indianapolis at that time you're growing up, just had the Indianapolis Indians, which was a AAA ball club of the Cincinnati Reds. And Indianapolis has gotten a little bit bigger in sports with the Pacers being halfway decent and, of course, the Indianapolis Colts. But, it's, growing up in Indianapolis, it's just far enough that I never was a Chicago sports fan.
Yes, it's funny. Although I lived in Indiana, you just assumed you were part of Chicago. But that being said, we watch Indiana and Purdue basketball pretty closely. My dad was always, although he went to school at Davidson and medical school at North Carolina, he was a big fan of the Big Ten. So we were always watching. Again, when the games were on TV, we would love to watch IU and Purdue, the basketball teams.
Katie or Knight?
Well, I'm partial to Knight. The reason being, I got the chance to meet him in Cincinnati. He and Tony La Russa are good friends, and he would come down when St. Louis was playing, and he would, watch the Cardinals take batting practice. So one day, as I'm walking out to hit, there's Bobby Knight, and Tony introduced me to him, and it was really one of the biggest thrills of my life to get to meet and chat with him for a while. You don't realize how big he is. He was a big man. He put his arm around me, and I felt like I was, a 10-year-old. It was a real thrill.
Do you remember what he said to you?
I do. I remember the conversation vividly because, he told me, he said, Hal, listen, you're the type of player I'd like to have on my team. And I tell you, it was that was one of the biggest compliments I've ever gotten. Pete Rose told me at one point in time he thought I could really hit, and that was a huge compliment. And then when Bobby Knight told me he'd love to have me on his team, that sent chills down my spine, boy.
When did you pick up the game of basketball, and how did you fall in love with the game of basketball? Most of my shows are about high school basketball or 6 degrees of separation of basketball in the state of Indiana. And you were an outstanding basketball player for Munster. But where did that kind of evolve, or is it one of those things when we were a kid that we played what we could play?
Well, again, growing up, we played a lot of basketball in the neighborhood. But like I said, my dad and I really loved watching college basketball. And in addition, a very good friend of ours, Jack Yerkes. Jack was an assistant coach at the high school at Munster, and this is when Mike Copper was a coach at Munster for from like 1972 through 77, 78, I think. And he eventually went to Warren Central. Now, Mike Copper, I think his claim to fame is he has the national high school record for consecutive free throws made when he was at Valparaiso, over 400 free throws, as I recall.
Wow.
But they used to let me tag along. Andy Yerkes, who's a year older than me, and I would go, and we would get to watch the high school team practice, and we would get to go to games with them occasionally. This is when I was 9, 10, 11 years old, and that was a big thrill because Munster had a good team. They were ranked number 1 in the state, I think in 1976. they had a center by the name of Ray Comandella, who eventually went to Evansville and tragically was killed in the plane crash. But they had a heck of a team, and so I was a big fan of watching them, and I really love basketball.
What and did you, in your professional basketball, did you enjoy the Bulls, or it was more about college basketball?
Well, I love the Bulls. Back then, this is when Norm Van Leer and Jerry Sloan were the guards. They had Tom Burwinkle to the center, Chet Walker, Bob Love. They had a really interesting team. I think they got to the conference championships, or they lost in the NBA finals, maybe the Phoenix one year. But they were a really fun team to watch. So I watched them a lot, but also obviously the great Indiana teams back then. Michigan had a good team too. When IU beat Michigan in the championship game, when Michigan had Ricky Green. But also DePaul at that time. This was the DePaul program was ascending, and they got all these great players from Chicago, Mark Aguirre, and this was a little later, but Terry Cummings and Teddy Grubbs and Clyde the Glide Bratt, all these guys. So there was a lot of fun basketball to watch.
Ray Meyer kind of got a bad rap because he could never either A, win the big one, or B, he was took an early exit occasionally with a really good DePaul Blue Demon team.
Yeah, the tournaments are, it's highly variable who's going to win those things, and you get into these single elimination tournaments, it's tough. But I tell you, DePaul had a really fun team to watch, and it was great because all these guys came right out of Chicago. 90% of that team was from Chicago. So you'd read about these guys before they went there, and then it was fun to follow them as well.
Tell us about getting interested in tennis.
Well, my dad and I used to play tennis when I was younger, and when the baseball season ended, I would oftentimes go to some. There was a tennis camp there that a guy by the name of Sid Rothstein ran. That it was kind of a full day camp. So in retrospect, I think it was a little bit of like, it gave my mom a little break from looking after me and my brother and sister. We would go to the camp all day long, and I learned how to play a little bit at that point in time. So I always enjoyed playing tennis. Actually, I played football. I was a quarterback until I broke my arm in 8th grade, and then my dad and I, at that time, there was no arthroscopic surgery. If you hurt your knee, you were pretty much your career was really going to be, your athletic career was going to be affected. So we decided that I would just play tennis instead of playing football, because I had anticipated playing football in high school, but Munster actually had a really good tennis team. We were in the top 10 in the state all the time. So I played doubles for 4 years, and I really enjoyed it.
Oh, I hear your home security system.
Yeah, exactly. I tell you what, I'm glad that he's awake. That's unusual.
That same thing. I had Rudy Tomjanovich on the show, and his dog started barking. He goes, "Oh yeah, hey, that's my security system." I just want, I apologize. So being so good in so many sports, I know it was different back then. Of course, it was way different back in the 60s and 70s. But in the 80s, what was it like being recruited? How many offers did you receive? Do you remember your first initial offer? And and we know you went to the University of Michigan, won Big Ten championship in '84 and '86. But what all went into that choosing? And I know this is a long question. And was it a pain in the butt?
Well, it's funny. I think I probably got recruited more to play basketball than I did baseball. And with baseball, most teams wanted me to pitch. So I think I was self-aware enough. I was a decent basketball player. I was competent, but I knew I didn't. I had weaknesses in my game. Not to discuss what they were, but I was left-handed. My right hand was very limited. I knew that, because I focused mainly on baseball. But on the baseball side of things, more people wanted me to pitch, and I knew I wasn't I didn't think I was a good pitcher either, which in retrospect was true. So I frankly didn't get a ton of recruited a ton by baseball teams to play first base and to hit. So I was actually going to go to Davidson College. My dad had played baseball and football there, and I was going to play basketball and baseball at Davidson. I was going to play baseball, and then also, I talked to the basketball coach, and they wanted me to come play for them too. But the focus was going to be baseball. But I got the opportunity to play in every year. There's a Indiana All-Star game that they play in Jasper, and I got the opportunity to play in that game. And it's a series of games, 3 games. And I went and I played. I played very well. I think I was 8 for 9 or 9 for 10. I don't know if I've ever hit that well in my life. So at the end of that, I actually had the opportunity. So some of the at that point school started approaching me, but this is late in the year. This is like early August. School's about ready to start. So my dad and we had visited Michigan the fall before because we didn't know a lot about college baseball, but Michigan had been in the College World Series the year before, and they were, I think, considered the best team in the Midwest at that time. And we went up and we watched the team practice. And as an aside, I always laugh. I tell people the day my dad and I went up there, we were sitting up there in the stands on the third base side of the stadium, and we're watching these guys drill. And I looked at my dad and I said, Dad, I don't know, the Big Ten. I don't know if I could play in this league. These guys are pretty darn good. Well, we were sitting there watching Chris Sable and Barry Larkin, and when you watch Larkin at that age, I can't describe how kind of electrifying an athlete he was at that time. It was jaw dropping. But anyhow, because I played so well in that tournament, I said, Dad, I think I'd like a chance to play in a bigger conference. And he said, great. So we called up the coach of Michigan, and I said, hey, coach, I'll walk on if you give me a room. I'd applied. I had gotten into school. I was all set. He said, deal. So he got me a room, and I walked on. I was kind of, he knew who I was. But that's how I ended up in Ann Arbor. And then I had to call up people at Davidson and explain that I was making a change.
There's not very much difference weather-wise from Ann Arbor and Munster. Would you say, or would you think it's a little bit colder, more snow, or almost the same?
It actually might even be more mild in Ann Arbor. We're close to the lake there in Munster, but it's essentially the same weather.
When it's 50 degrees, I'm coming from Houston, Texas, but I was born and raised in Indianapolis for the first 25 years of my life. When it gets 50 degrees in Houston, I'm wearing shorts, and people are looking at me like I'm nuts and crazy, and we did the same thing in Indiana. It's 50 degrees or 40 degrees. You got shorts on, you're shooting baskets. There's still maybe ice on the basketball nets. So you really didn't have to, you really were already in that cycle of cold and playing baseball.
Yeah, the weather never bothered me. It's funny. It's going to be 45 degrees for a day, and I might go out and try to play golf. And my wife looks at me like I'm crazy. No, the weather, that wasn't a big adjustment. It's funny, throughout the course of my career, the cold weather never bothered me. And I actually, Candlestick Park, I think I hit better there than any place in the league, or as good there as I did anywhere else. And guys hated to play in there because it was cold and it was windy. But it never really bothered me. It's funny. We played my sophomore year. We played a doubleheader against Indiana in Ann Arbor in the snow. They had to clear the snow from the infield for us to play, and yet we played out there for 6 hours. And it's the coldest I've ever been in my life. And since that particular day, the cold affects me even less.
Tell us about those Michigan years. Of course, won the Big Ten championship in '84, and I think you guys went to the World Series, College World Series in '85.
We won in '84. Yes, we won in '84. We won the Big Ten '84, '86. Did not win it in '85, but the best team we had was when I was there in '85. We had over the course of the 3 years, I think 7 big league players on those teams and another 10 to 15 that played in AAA and another 15 that played pro ball. We really had a special team. But my sophomore year, we were loaded. We started off the year 26-0, but we didn't win the Big Ten tournament. You get in these tournaments, things can happen. And they ended up sending us to the Southeast Regional in Starkville, Mississippi. And we get beat by New Orleans. Wally Whitehurst is pitching from New Orleans, who pitched for the Mets later. And we get in the losers bracket. And we come back and we run the table, and the Mississippi State beats us. We had to beat them twice. We beat them the first game. But they had that team. They had Rafael Palmeiro, Will Clark, Bobby Thigpen, Jeff Brantley. They had 4 big all-stars on that team and a bunch of other great players. And that's some of the best baseball I've ever seen played. And people always ask me about the greatest experiences I've had in the game of baseball. And obviously playing in the World Series, the Major League World Series was a thrill. But that series down there in Starkville was probably the most exciting baseball I've ever seen because here we were, kind of like 2 heavyweights slugging it out down there. And I think that ballpark, it had about a capacity of 5,000 people, and they had 20,000 people out there.
What was compare travel when you played college baseball and then to what you did in the big leagues?
So we were playing in the Big Ten. We would play at the time there was an East Division and a West Division. Our division, we had Michigan State, Ohio State, Indiana, Purdue, and us. So we would play 2 doubleheaders on Friday and Saturday, as I recall. So we would go, if we were going to play in Bloomington and West Lafayette, we would drive down there on Thursday night. And then otherwise we would typically play a doubleheader in Ann Arbor during the week, and typically we hosted. The teams from around Michigan would come like to play at our ballpark, so we would play Grand Valley State and those type of clubs in Ann Arbor. So the travel wasn't too bad. Big league travel is much different. We would take 11 road trips a year with typically 3 stops on each road trip, 2 or 3 stops on the road trip, and you get spoiled, with the travel there in the big leagues because it essentially your bus takes you out to the tarmac. You walk up on your plane, and then you take off 20 minutes later. You land, the bus is sitting there for you. The bus takes you right to the hotel. So they do make it very easy to travel. The challenge, the difference and the challenge about playing in the all over the country are the different time zones. So we would go and play a 3-game series in San Francisco, then 3 in San Diego, then 3 in LA. We usually go out there to play 9 games with 1 day off out there. So you become acclimated to that time zone. And then you come back to Cincinnati, which is on the Eastern time zone, and a few days later, you're playing a businessman special at 12:35. And you're out there literally, trying to wake up, and that you kind of get whiplashed. So that's the big difference. The travel itself wasn't a problem just because how well they treated us and how easy they made it. It was just the changing time zones and playing games at all different hours.
Baseball has become your focus while you're at Michigan. Do you still pick up some pick up basketball games? You still pick up tennis racket and play some tennis? Is that something you did to keep in shape, or was it all just about baseball at that point in time?
Oh no, when I was in Ann Arbor, we used to go and we'd go to the intramural building, the basketball team, and we would try to run that basketball court, for a long time. And we were good. We would play down there whenever we could, as long as the coaches didn't find out we were playing. But when they found out, they were not happy with us. But it was funny. We would go down there and we would run that court for hours on end because we had some good basketball players. Scott Kamenicki, who later pitched for the Yankees for a long time, he was our go-to defender. So his nickname was Red. He's got red hair. And whoever the best player was in their team, we would say, "Red, that's your guy. Stop him." And So the rest of us didn't have to play as much defense. But yeah, we played a lot of basketball. To this day, the place I work out down in Chicago, I will go play some basketball at times, but the body doesn't do what I think it's going to do, what it's supposed to do these days. So it's a little more challenging. And I play tennis still as well. I play more golf, but I go out there and hit some tennis balls. I enjoy the game.
Did you enjoy watching tennis or just mostly playing?
Back then I enjoyed the tennis back in that when I was growing up. The guys like McEnroe and Borg and Guillermo Vilas and Eli Nastase, those guys. There was a lot of shot making back in those days because of the wood rackets were much. You couldn't hit the ball as hard. A lot more angles, a lot more finesse. I watched the game. I watched some tennis now, but not as much. It's a much different game these days.
Did you ever play on clay?
Yes. Yep. I played on clay a good bit. So I like the clay court game. Is fun. The ball sits up for very little bit, and it's a lot easier on your knees.
So during this whole baseball thing at Michigan, what's your kind of thought process? Are you like in the back of your mind, I'm going to go to the major leagues and be, and go to the big show? What kind of, mental process is that to play and think about what you want to do, and are you good enough to do that professionally?
No, it's funny. My father was a pediatrician, and I wanted to go into orthopedics, so I never really thought about playing baseball. I wanted to go to Davidson because they had a phenomenal acceptance rate to medical school, and Michigan was the same. So I was a student who was playing baseball, and never really thought about it until my sophomore year. I had a good year and played very well in the regional, and then I had the opportunity to play in the Cape Cod League, and where you're playing against the best players in the country, and I hit pretty well out there, and you start to see the other guys getting drafted that you played against, and you start to think, maybe I get drafted. And then by my junior year, I was kind of inundated with labs and a lot of intensive schoolwork that it was making my ability to practice and play. It was challenging. So my dad and I decided during my junior year, that if I had the opportunity to play professionally, to get drafted, I was going to do that. And had I not been drafted my junior year, I was not going to play anymore. I was just going to go back to school and focus on my schoolwork. So I got drafted, and my dad and I said, "Oh shoot, this will be a fun summer job. It'll be a nice diversion from school, and just I could always say that I got a chance to play pro ball." So that was the attitude with which I entered the game. Then played pretty well my first foray, and then I was in Double-A my first full season, and I was in Triple-A my second full season. And I think when you get to Triple-A, that's when I started thinking, well, I might actually get called to the big league one of these days. And that's when it became very real. But until that point, I went back to school after I signed, and then the first year afterward, I went back to school. My intent was to continue with my schoolwork.
You were number 23 in high school, right? I think I found a basketball picture of you, and I think you were wearing number 23. Was there any reason for certain numbers that you wore?
None. None whatsoever. They gave me 23 when I got to Ann Arbor, but the number number 9. I always liked 9, but I was like never advocated to be given that number just because that was Ted Williams' number, and I read a lot about him, but I was just given 23, and then I wore it a lot after that.
Did your batting stance start in high school, change while it was in college, stay the same?
It changed throughout the course of my college career and my professional career, and I know everyone that saw me play later, watched me hit with my feet moving. I never hit like that when I was younger. Like when I was at Michigan, I hit out of my sophomore year. I eventually hit out of like a low crouch, kind of like Oster Gamble, if you remember Oster Gamble. People wouldn't have not recognized me hitting. But then as I was working with Lou Pennell in the minor leagues, I started to move my feet a little bit, and that's how I eventually kind of developed that style of hitting.
Tell us about the Columbus Clippers and getting, we all watch Bull Durham, and you got the call to the show. What was it like getting called up and playing for the New York Yankees?
Well, it's funny. So we had a day off in Columbus, and we had an infielder by the name of Jeff Moronco, who was married with 2 little girls. And for whatever reason, they invited me to go to Kings Island, which is a theme park just north of Cincinnati, on my off day. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll go. Well, I went down there, and I discovered I hadn't been in a theme park in a long time. The roller coasters were not for me. And went on some roller coasters with the girls and a few other things. And I got really, nauseous and sick. So I got home that night and was just happy to go to sleep and to like with terra firma underneath me, But then I get a call about 4:00 in the morning from from Kevin Rand, who was the trainer in Columbus, and he said, Hal, you gotta be in Toronto by this afternoon. We got a plane ticket for you. And he didn't tell me that I was getting called up to the big leagues. I had to put that together real quick. When I realized that I was being called up to the big leagues, immediately called my mom and my dad, and that was probably the highlight of my career right there. Just getting called that call, just even to play in the big leagues for a day, it's something you dreamed of your whole life. And just knowing I was going to put on the Yankee pinstripes and, play where Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth had played, it was kind of out of this world. So I got up there and went to the hotel in Toronto, and I immediately learned that playing for the New York Yankees is unlike anything else in baseball, because the zoo was a hotel. There are Yankee fans everywhere, and it's just a different world when you're playing for the Yankees.
By the way, Kings Island is the best amusement park in the world, hands down. You probably got your butt whipped by the Beast or by the Racer is probably what you made the mistake of doing.
Well, there were several rides that took care of me, and those girls were loving it. But I don't know if I've been back to. I can tell you I haven't been on a roller coaster ride since that day, and that was 31 years ago, 32 years ago.
Okay, here's a dumb question. This is a question you may have never been asked. So on the day that you're on AAA, you're making A money. When you go to the big show, do you immediately get a raise?
Yes, yeah. I've
always wondered how that worked.
Yeah, that's how it works. Yeah, immediately. So they put you on the major league roster, and back then when I first signed, I was making $700 a month during the season in low A. Then you went to high A was, as I recall, $900 a month. Double A was $1,100, but I think Triple A was $1,300 a month for Triple A. But you immediately go and you start making the major league salary, which at the time was $68,000, $68,500, which was a huge raise, So yeah, you start getting paid differently, and it's the big league meal money is much different too. So you make more money in meal money in the big leagues than you do with your salary. Back then, that was the case.
Do you still have your first hit, the baseball?
I do have it. Yes. Yep. I've got that. It's here somewhere. And it was, I got a base hit to left field my first at bat, against Dwayne Ward. It was an interesting day, but yeah, I do have that somewhere.
So you're like, I've got my first hit, everything's going good. I'm going to be a Yankee. How do things transpire, and all of a sudden you're a Cincinnati Red? Well,
Don Mattingly was the first baseman for the Yankees at the time, and he was the best first baseman in baseball, an MVP candidate every single year. I knew I was not going to play first base for the Yankees. They tried playing me in the outfield some. I wasn't a great outfielder. I think I was a pretty good defensive first baseman, but the outfield, I just never played there my whole life. So it was apparent that I was going to get moved. Now, in my second year, I went back and forth for parts of 2 years with going back between Columbus and New York. After my second year, they wanted to send me to Puerto Rico to play winter ball, learn how to play the outfield more. And I had been hurt in Seattle in September. I had popped my hamstring, and I wasn't healthy enough to go down there. So when they ascertained that I wasn't healthy enough to go down there, they traded for Mel Hall like 2 or 3 days later, which for all intents and purposes signaled that they were going to trade me. So they traded me to the Reds, and I remember getting that call, and it was funny. I didn't know a lot about the Reds. I just knew I didn't like them because they used to come in and wear out the Cubs every year. The two teams I really hated were the Phillies and the Reds, because they would, in the 70s, the Cubs would get crushed by those guys. But I knew that Larkin and Sabo were down there, who were a couple of Michigan guys, and that's how I ended up over there.
What is your relationship with both those guys, by the way? Did you guys, while you were at Michigan, bond a really good friendship? Is it something that you guys will text or chat with each other once, twice a week?
Well, Sabo signed before I got there, so he left. He was there the year before I got there, so I didn't play with Chris in Ann Arbor, but he and I became very good friends when we were in Cincinnati. We still communicate often. And I was very close with Barry as well. He was a year ahead of me, but I was very close with that group of guys. We lived in a house together my junior year after Barry had signed. He came back and he lived with us. So I don't talk to Barry as much as I do Chris, but with all those guys from those teams, when I see them, it's just like we haven't missed a beat. It's just like it would have been 30 years ago.
We could do a Ken Burns documentary on the 1990 season and make it 8 or 9 parts. But what was your initial reaction getting to Cincinnati? Did you see that you guys had something special, or how long did it take you to get into the season to go, man, you know what? Number one, this is fun. Number two, I'm hitting great. And number three, I think possibly, good things could happen from this team.
Well, our first day of spring training. Now the Reds had been good. They had been in second place in the National League West 2 of the 3 prior years, or 3 of the 4 prior years. They had a talented team, but Lou Piniella called us together and he said, guys, listen, you've been close the last couple of years. You've been very close. He said, we're going to win it this year. We are going to win. He said, we got a lot of talent in this room, and there's no reason, no excuse for us not to win. And that is my expectation, my anticipation. And we looked at each other. Now, again, I didn't know anyone in that, I didn't know a lot of the guys, but there was clearly a look of recognition in that room, and everyone. That was the expectation from day one. And we went out and we started off 9-0, and we went down. We swept the Astros. The Astros had a good club, and we just kind of blew them out of the ballpark. I think it became apparent to everyone that that we were very talented and that we could win. When you get into the playoff series, anything can happen. But in retrospect, we were a team that was very, very well constructed to play in a playoff series. We had the best bullpen maybe in the history of the game up to that point. We had these 3 dominant relievers. We had power right-handed pitching in Jose Rijo and Jack Armstrong, but we also Danny Jackson, Tom Brown. We had great starting pitching, but we also had an excellent defensive team with a lot of speed. And contact hitters. And if you look at it, the teams that had a lot of that have those power bullpens, a lot of high strikeouts per nine, that play good defense with contact hitters. They play well in the playoffs, and I don't think, in retrospect, I think people just they underrated us that year.
Does Lou Piniella have a sense of humor?
Oh, he sure does, boy. He's got a wicked sense of humor, but he's also got a wicked temper. So hopefully he's in a good mood when you're talking to him. Lou was always a fun guy to be around for various reasons at various times. I really owe a great debt of gratitude to him for my career. He traded for me from New York. He worked with me when I was with the Yankees, and helped me tremendously. And I think the world of Lou.
Okay, so I already asked the dumb question about pay and stuff like that. Here's another dumb question: is Lou Piniella the only person that looks like he must have an odd-shaped head because his hats never fit his head?
That's you know what? He had this nervous tick, I think, where he would sit here and he was always adjusting the bill of his cap like this. If you watch any film of him, this is what he's doing. So the guys used to imitate him, and all the time now they'd be sitting in their dugout doing this, But I think his hat fit. I just don't think I think he liked moving around a bit.
I was like I said, I was born and raised in Indianapolis. Went to Indianapolis Indians games. Got to see the Big Red Machine come to town for a couple of exhibition games. So yeah. I was a Reds fan. So starting out, wire to wire, and then winning the World Series. And as a fan, you guys plowed through that World Series, and it was like anticlimactic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, but because I'm a fan, I got the wire to wire T-shirt. I got I got everything associated with it. But I guess for some other baseball fans, it may not have been exciting, but it was truly just a dominant 1990, one of the most dominant baseball seasons in the history of the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we went into that series with Oakland, they had swept the Red Sox, so they had a few days off. That's not always an advantage. A lot of times in baseball, you're better off if you keep playing. You're in a rhythm, and I think that they were a little stale when we played that first game, and they had a dominant team, and I don't really think they really knew what they were getting in us. We jumped out on top of them and won that first game, and then real quickly we won the next two as well. I think they just anticipated that they were so good that they were going to come back and overwhelm us, and it just didn't happen, And we were happy that I think they were so stunned that we had jumped out that they just didn't react until it was over.
And, just from a fan's perspective, not a player's perspective, I was really, listen to me, I was really worried about the A's. I didn't think you guys were going to beat the A's.
Listen, I remember I was sitting in our food room there, our lounge in Cincinnati before the first game, and I mean they had if you look at their team, they had an unbelievable team, a fantastic team, Hall of Famers, they were loaded. But I was sitting there, and our advanced scout, a guy by the name of Jimmy Stewart, walked in, and he said, "Hey, listen," he said, "fellas, I just got off the phone with Mel Didier." Now, Mel Didier was the Dodgers. He was their advanced scout. He was a legendary scout. And if you listen to Kirk Gibson talk about that home run he hit off of Dennis Eckersley in the '88 World Series, he says, "Listen, Mel Didier told me that this guy's going to 3-2. He's going to throw you a backdoor slider." And Gibson talks about how, well, when I got to 3-2, Mel had told me to look for this slider, and I did. So this is the same guy. And Mel, Jimmy said, "Listen, Mel just told me you can beat these guys with power right-handed arm. With power right-handed arm." He said, and And just about the same time, Lou walks into the room, and he said, and fellas, that's what we got. He said, we've got the power right-handed arms. He said, we're going to, he got messing with his hat. He said, we're going to win. We are going to beat these guys. And then Tony Perez walks in right behind him. And Tony says, oh, yeah, we're going to win. Now, here I am, I was 25, but I was still a rookie. But here you've got the Tony Perez, who, played on these championship teams with the Reds, greatest teams ever, in the Lou Piniella. And they meant that. You could see the conviction in their eyes. They really thought that we're going to win these. We're going to beat these guys. And that's when I finally thought, maybe we can beat these guys. And again, looking around the room, everyone in that room was like, yeah, we're going. Let's do it. So there, that helped. It's moments like that can kind of turn the tide psychologically.
Do you remember the moment, the third out, you guys are World Series champions? What kind of thoughts raced through your mind? Did it go by so quick that you didn't grab it? Or what was the excitement or the just your thought process? I'm Johnny Bench, Pete Rose, a Big Red Machine. I am a Cincinnati Red World Series champion.
Well, there's a sense of elation that you can't really describe. The major league season, it's a long season. You start playing in February, but you start preparing back in November, early November. It's a long grind, and you build toward this moment, and you build this moment for your entire life, really, as a ball player. And then to win, to know that you've done it, that you will always be a world champion, that this you have the best team in the world. It's overwhelming. It's emotions that you really just you can't relate.
What are you? I mean, do you have a great memory? Did you love being the Cincinnati Red?
I did. I really, I took a lot of pride in playing for the Reds. Much different than New York. The Yankees are New York is New York, but playing in Cincinnati, you're a fabric of you're part of the fabric of the community there. And it's as you are in New York, but it's different. It's a different way in a town like Cincinnati. The people around that town, they live and die with those games, and it means a lot to them and to that region down there. And I think that it was never lost on us, and we appreciated their support and wanted to win for the people down there.
During your baseball career, I'm assuming it was first part of this question. I'm assuming it was fun to go and play the Cubbies, and family probably came and see you, and you probably enjoyed just the history of Wrigley Field. But besides Wrigley, what are some of your favorite ballparks that you love to play in, and which are some of the ballparks that you were like, I could actually do without and would rather go back, would rather just skip the series?
Well, a lot of that depended upon where you saw the ball well and how you hit in the different parks. But playing in Wrigley Field was always special. Playing in Fenway Park, I got the chance to play there. That was memorable. The older parks, the parks with history, playing in Tiger Stadium, the old parks before they were torn down. That was always very, very special. But I liked playing in Philadelphia. I loved playing there, tough crowd. But I always liked playing in Philly. I liked playing in New York too. There was always a lot of electricity in those ballparks. The West Coast, playing in LA and San Diego, it's a different vibe. Very much more of a relaxed atmosphere. It's good for baseball, but it's different. But you know what? There are very few parks that I didn't enjoy playing in. I think that Montreal was a pretty tough park. It was kind of hard to see up there, but it was always fun going to Montreal too. Culturally, it was just always a different experience.
Do you ever think, if it wasn't for the game of baseball, what opportunities would you have not gotten, or what are some of the opportunities you got, or people that you got to meet that you probably wouldn't have if you would not have played the great game of baseball?
Wow. I mean, my life has been so enriched by the opportunities I've been given due to baseball. I mean, I've gotten to know this country. The travel that we did, both as a minor leaguer and as a big league player. Not many people get the opportunity to do that. To stay in the San Francisco, New York, Atlanta, Miami, you name it, Houston, Philly, to get to know these areas. And we would get a chance to dine at great restaurants. And just getting to know people around the country, that was a real gift. But the players I played with, those are the relationships, and those are the experiences I think that you cherish the most. Playing with guys from all over the world, Japan, Dominican, Venezuela, Panama, learning about all these different cultures too. And then, everyone you're introduced to along the way, you get to meet a lot of interesting people. Rob Dibble and I are good friends, and Rob and I, we had the program director for one of the radio stations down there to take us to any concerts we wanted to go to, and we got a chance to meet, you name it. We like rock and heavy metal and stuff. So, Eddie Van Halen just passed. Got to meet those guys.
Wow.
You name it. There's probably a band that we got to meet so many bands, get to know these guys pretty well. That was pretty cool too.
Wow, very neat, and very sad about Eddie. Very sad.
Yeah, for sure.
What is the mindset of a baseball player? I mean, I guess I'm just asking yours. Do you know when it's close that you're like, it's coming to an end? Is it sad, or do you kind of overcompensate by thinking about what am I going to do after this game rather than focus on, it's about time to hang the cleats up?
Well, I think there's a sense of relief, in one respect. As you get older, it's harder to keep yourself healthy. The Achilles heel, so to speak, in my career was my health. But as you get older, it's harder to stay healthy. And I think when you're thinking about shutting it down, you realize that you're not going to have to go to all the effort to get yourself in a shape to play. And it's not the work you don't mind. It's more of the rehab and the surgeries and that you are looking. You don't mind, putting those in the rearview mirror. I don't think oftentimes players are prepared enough to transition. It's a very difficult transition, and guys struggle with it only because you've grown up obsessed with this game since a very small age, and unless you had planned to transition to something else in the game, you're probably not prepared for what the second or third act in your life is going to be. And even if you do something else in the game, I scouted and I worked for teams after I retired. There's nothing like being down in the dugout and actually playing.
So what do you do? What does Hal Morris do in retirement? I mean, do you play a lot of golf? Do you have a lot of business ventures that you do, or?
Yeah, I play some golf, but I'm working for a San Francisco-based fund and a private equity fund, and we work with athletes, and we actually make investments in the athletes themselves. So I'm so close to the game, and after I retired, I ended up going back and I scouted for 3 years, and I was the Angels professional scouting director for 5. So I still have relationships with all the guys I got to know scouting, and what a good group of guys all the scouts are. So I stay in touch with all those guys all the time to kind of see what's going on in the game.
How has the game changed since Hal Morris played it?
Well, there's a lot more velocity in the game these days, and the upper end velocity, you know, you can only throw. It's only you know, you're only capable of throwing so hard. So it's not that guys are throwing harder. It's just you see more of them that throw hard. You know, I think no one threw as hard as Nolan Ryan, but you see a lot more velocity, and you see a lot more emphasis on the hitting has changed a lot. You know, you see a lot more emphasis on hitting the ball at the ballpark. And when I was playing, there was more contact. There was you know, the stolen base was much more of a factor, hit and run. The game, you know, the game is, you know, it's transition in that sense, but not to say that you can't go back in the other direction.
How do you think Major League Baseball did during the pandemic? How well do you think they pulled that off?
You know what? I think they did a good job, frankly. In retrospect, I think they would have played more games. They probably could have played 100 plus. Now I know there were economic issues involved, but I thought they did an admirable job, and I do think that the game will be back to normal hopefully by May of next year. Maybe they delay the season next year, but you know, I think they did the best they could given the hand they were dealt.
Best pitcher you ever faced?
Well, Mariano Rivera. I only faced him one time, but I really didn't know what to do with that cutter that he threw. And I hit righties pretty well, and I felt comfortable hitting righties, whatever they threw. But that's when I was left scratching my head. One at bat over my entire career, I thought, I'm not really sure what to do with that. And then Randy Johnson, you know, I told you he was pitching there in Indianapolis. You know, he was a guy, if you're left-handed, you really don't want to face.
What was the damn moment like that, you know, when you first got to the big leagues? Like, you know, oh, wow. You know, it did something, you know, a pitcher or a pitch went past you or something happened that you were just like, welcome to the big leagues.
You know, frankly, it was walking out in the dugout with the Yankees because, you know, they had Ricky Henderson, Dave Winfield, Don Mattingly, Jack Clark, Ron Guidry, Tommy John, you know, Willie Randolph. I could run through the whole roster. These guys are all like all-stars. And just seeing these guys play, I remember, and frankly, watching Don Mattingly work. I remember I thought I was a hard worker, but I told my dad, I said, I don't work as hard as Don. I don't work as hard as he does. And it made me realize I needed to work harder. And I needed to get stronger. I needed to lift weights. But again, you know, watching those guys play, it's a different game in the big leagues than it is in AAA. And I remember Eric Davis told me when I was with the Yankees, he said, you know, I first got there, he said, "Hey kid," he said, "there are no superstars in AAA."
And of course, Don Mattingly from Evansville and Tommy John was from Terre Haute, Indiana. So
yep, and Don took me under his wing, and for the short time I was there, and it couldn't have been a better guy. Everything you think that he is, he is.
Do you consider yourself from Alabama? Do you consider yourself a Hoosier? Do you consider yourself from Indiana? What do you say when someone says, "Where are you from?"
I tell them from Indiana. You know, I was born in Alabama, but I tell them I'm from Indiana. Then I will tell them I'm from Munster. Then I'll explain I try to explain I'm just west of Gary and Hammond because people aren't too familiar with that Northwest Indiana. So I try to kind of spell it out for them. And at one time, you know, I think when I went to Michigan, I probably said that I was from Chicago, but no, I mean, for the last 30 years, it's been I'm from Indiana.
You know, it was interesting. It's been a while, but someone said, you know why we were talking about Michigan earlier, you know why the wind blows north in Indiana?
Why is that?
Because Michigan sucks. So, you know, but you know, Hal Morris. It's been I ran long. It's been an incredible conversation. I think everyone will enjoy this. I appreciate your time and thank you so much.
Anytime, Billy. I had a great time.
All right, appreciate it.